As the week of November 24th to 28th approaches, the world of Fairmont Crest braces for a storm no one sees coming. Beneath the polished luxury of the gated community, tensions simmer dangerously close to eruption. Personal vendettas sharpen, forbidden desires deepen, and the fragile alliances holding several families together begin to tear under the weight of buried secrets. New temptations emerge, old wounds resurface, and every character finds themselves walking a tightening emotional tightrope. Where one reckless choice could ignite consequences stretching far beyond the walls they've built to protect themselves. In a week charged with shifting power, tangled loyalties, and high-stakes revelations, nothing remains stable, and no one escapes untouched. Haley moved through the gilded halls of the Fairmont Crest Country Club with an ease that did not belong to someone wrestling with a double life. Her marriage existed like an accessory she no longer wore intentionally, more of an obligation she maintained in the way she remembered to water her plants, barely, and only when the leaves began to droop. Her husband, a respected DMV attorney with a flawless public image, remained blissfully unaware that his wife's attention had begun to orbit another man. Nothing about Haley's poised exterior hinted at the heat churning beneath her ribcage each time she saw Isaiah Hawthorne drift into a room like an uninvited gravitational force. She had told herself repeatedly that her interest in him was intellectual, professional, emotionally detached. But each time she saw the young advisor working at Banneker, her pulse betrayed her, reminding her how quickly self-control erodes when loneliness wraps itself around ambition. She had grown tired of the monotony of her marriage, of the polite silence between dinner courses, of the careful diplomacy that came with being married to a man who measured every word for public consumption. Isaiah, on the other hand, was unpolished but purposeful. There was something unguarded in him, something she wanted to claim, even if that meant unraveling the few threads still holding her domestic life together. Her steps faltered when she caught sight of him at the club, standing under the warm glow of recessed lights. Despite her careful rehearsing, the sight of him stirred a friction inside her that she could neither suppress nor rationalize. She knew the danger of allowing desire to steer her decisions, yet a quiet satisfaction swelled in her chest as she watched him notice her presence. She sensed questions in the way he regarded her. Questions she had no intention of answering honestly, because honesty would destroy her sooner than any affair could. She had no desire to explain that she wasn't chasing romance, she was chasing purpose, validation, an escape from emotional stagnation. For the first time in years, she felt alive enough to make reckless decisions, and she was not sure she wanted to stop. Elsewhere in the shadows of Fairmont Crest, Bill prepared himself for a conversation he had delayed for far too long. His meeting with Tomas had little to do with mentorship and everything to do with testing loyalty. Bill had built his success on controlled alliances, subtle coercion, and the occasional calculated betrayal. Tomas, eager but inexperienced, had become both an asset and a liability. His ambition made him useful, yet dangerously unpredictable. Bill sensed that Tomas had begun asking questions about aspects of the company that should have remained buried in silence. Every organization had its skeletons, but Bill's were arranged meticulously, each one supporting a secret he could not afford to let crumble. Tomas arrived with a hopeful tension clinging to him. The young man had worked tirelessly for a promotion he believed was finally within reach, but the air surrounding Bill felt charged with something far heavier than good news. Bill had grown adept at manipulating expectations, molding fear into obedience. He knew Tomas wanted advancement, validation, a future. Yet what Bill needed was assurance, proof that Tomas would remain loyal even when facing difficult truths. The outcome of this meeting would determine whether Tomas became his next prized protege or merely another disposable employee sacrificed to protect the empire. Tomas stood on the edge without realizing that any misstep could sever the fragile thread keeping him safe. Meanwhile, in a dim lounge softened by jazz and low lighting, Leslie nursed a drink while trying to silence thoughts she could no longer control. Her world had grown smaller, more claustrophobic, the emotional tremors within her threatening to split her life open. She told herself she was only there for a moment of quiet, a reprieve from expectations that felt heavier each day. But her solitude was interrupted by a presence that drifted into her periphery, Detective Marcel Malone. His approach was confident, the kind of confidence that came from knowing more about people than they knew about themselves. Leslie felt his gaze before she acknowledged him, sensing a curiosity from him that she both resisted and welcomed. Her instincts had always been sharp. She recognized law enforcement by posture, by demeanor, by the sharpened alertness hidden behind casual gestures. It was second nature to her, a skill carved from years of observing others and surviving circumstances that required constant vigilance. Malone carried the weight of a man who was accustomed to navigating morally ambiguous spaces. That alone intrigued her. She had always been drawn to people with complicated pasts because it made her feel less alone in her own. Their interaction unfolded not as flirtation but as a subtle exchange of vulnerabilities, neither of them ready to admit why they stayed at the table longer than necessary. Leslie was not used to being seen, truly seen, and Malone's attention, unpredictable, probing, forced her to confront feelings she had long buried. But peace was fleeting at Fairmont Crest. As Leslie and Malone settled into a quiet, charged familiarity, Ted entered the lounge. His eyes settled on them immediately, and a knot tightened in his chest. He had been trying to keep his distance, to respect boundaries he barely understood anymore, yet seeing Leslie with someone else awakened a volatile mix of jealousy, protectiveness, and dread. He knew far more about Malone than Leslie did, and the detective's involvement in certain off-the-record operations made Ted's pulse spike. Malone was not a harmless flirt, he was a threat disguised in polite confidence. Ted had participated in clandestine meetings, gatherings with one goal, to shield Martin Richardson at all costs. Protecting Martin required silence, coordination, and often morally dubious tactics. Malone, with his connections and relentless persistence, was one of few obstacles capable of unraveling everything. Watching Leslie unknowingly entangle herself with a man who could destroy their fragile alliance filled Ted with a frustration he didn't know how to articulate. He felt cornered by circumstance, unable to intervene without revealing truths that could place everyone at risk. Across town, Haley stepped deeper into her web of manipulations as she accompanied Bill to a night out. She played the role of a jealous wife convincingly, perhaps too convincingly. Her emotions slipped between genuine and strategic, blurring the line separating truth from performance. She accused him of knowingly putting her in proximity to his ex-wife, Danny, and though her outrage was initially feigned, it quickly spiraled into something real. Haley despised being confronted with remnants of Bill's past, pieces of him she could not control. It reminded her of the instability she tried to hide behind her poised facade. Bill, trapped between past and present, found himself weighed down by unresolved history. Danny's presence lingered like a shadow at the edge of his vision, a reminder of choices he had made and consequences that resurfaced without warning. He wanted to escape the emotional labyrinth he had created, yet every attempt only tightened the snare around him. Danny herself was no longer anchored by memories of Bill. She had thrown herself into a fresh start with Andre, a honeymoon phase filled with optimism and fragile promises of stability. Their return home was meant to symbolize a new chapter. Instead, chaos greeted them in the form of smoke curling through their kitchen. The fire, though small, became a metaphor for the turmoil simmering beneath their cheerful surface. Stress escalated quickly as they moved to extinguish the disaster, their panic revealing how unprepared they were for real-world complications. The ruined kitchen left them questioning whether their marriage, still tender and untested, could withstand unexpected turmoil when pleasure gave way to pressure. As smoke thinned and the aftermath settled, Danny sensed an undercurrent of tension in Andre she hadn't noticed before. He carried an unspoken fear that he might not be able to keep their new life from unraveling. Danny, standing amid charred remnants of their holiday meal, felt equally exposed. Their perfect honeymoon no longer shielded them from reality, and cracks began forming where certainty once lived. Back at Fairmont Crest, tensions across multiple households began to intersect in subtle, unseen ways. Haley's pursuit of Isaiah threatened to disrupt not only her marriage but also the already fragile political landscape surrounding Banneker. Bill's control over Tomas wavered with each uncertain decision. Leslie's growing attachment to Malone placed her in the center of a storm she did not yet perceive. Ted struggled under the weight of dangerous secrets while Danny and Andre watched their newfound happiness teeter on unsteady ground. Each character moved through their separate crises unaware that their choices formed threads of a larger tapestry, one tightening into a knot none of them could untangle. Bonds strained. Loyalties weakened. Personal desires clashed with survival instincts. Every step forward pushed them closer to the edge, where the consequences of their actions awaited with silent inevitability. One misstep, one exposed secret, one betrayal would be enough to send the entire delicate network collapsing. And deep down, each of them understood that collapse was not just possible, it was imminent.